Welcome to What a Word is Worth, a space for creative minds to speak about viable ways to heal the world through writing and other inventive mediums. This is your host, Marianela Medrano. I am the founder of Palabra Training Center, where words are giving us medicine. Today, my guest is Deb McBride, who has been practicing astrology for most of her life, in addition to holding degrees in chemistry and mathematics. Astrology has always been a vocation, as Deb was first drawn to it as a child in the late 1960s, when it was very much a part of her life and surroundings. As an adult, she began her professional astrological counseling practice in 1986 and has continued to serve clients and deepen her knowledge of psychology through her own profound experiences of healing herself. She studied advanced astrological counseling techniques with Michael Lutin. How you say
Michael
his
Lutin.
Lutin, using the work of psychiatrist Dr. Robert Langs. She enjoys the study of both personal and collective astrology and has a weekly podcast called the Golden Astrologer. Deb has created half the based worksheet for the holographic scaling system New Vision, and you can learn more about that if you go to www.newvisionusa.com, which can scan a person's holographic field and provide physical, emotional, and psychological information about their field. She's also a Reiki master in the 5D system of Rainbow Crystal Reiki. Deb is available for consultations in astrology at www.thegoldenastrologer.com, and also Reiki and New Vision. So welcome, Deb. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Marianelle. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. So let's, the podcast is about words and the healing power of words. So let's begin by hearing how you first encounter or became aware of the power of language.
That's a very good question.
Mhm.
I think I was very young because I was always interested in, I was always reading as a kid. I was always reading. And I was introduced to astrology as a very young child, as it was always around me. And uh, the description of the language of astrology was something that was important and explained how people were in the world and how they can expect things to go in the world. And then there's everyday life, and there's language in everyday life, and how you speak, what you say, the energy, the emotion behind what you're saying. And I think all of that happened as a young child in elementary school, how children spoke to each other, how the teachers spoke to us, how we would speak to each other. And I was always very careful about my words. I have to say, I was always very careful about the way I spoke to people. And I don't I think I knew very early on that that wasn't the case with everyone.
Mhm. So,
Yeah.
what is the function of words, of palabras, in the work that you do? Has using self expression helped you heal at any point in your life?
Yes, for sure. I'm I'm more of a wordy person. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not someone who keeps my emotions bottled up and to myself and doesn't have words for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I have always been able to talk and discuss and write out how I'm feeling. So for sure, I feel that self-expression, whether it's creative or whether it's therapeutic, is has helped me tremendously through words. Yes.
Yeah. So, going back to astrology, for the listeners who might not be clear about what astrology is, can you please give us a description in plain English for the person who might have even, I have heard people interpret astrology in a way that is very full of stigmas and what in my view is a misconstruction of it. So can you give the audience in plain English kind of a description of what astrology really truly is?
I first of all believe it's a language.
Mhm,
So, and I call it an alchemical language
mhm,
because it's a language where you can experience something transformative in the discussion of the astrology of the person's natal chart, etc. And astrology can be very healing in that respect. Now, I think people do misconceive astrology and they confuse it with a lot of things, a lot of other, maybe palm reading, maybe psychic abilities, and it's an analysis of your birth chart and an analysis of perhaps where the planets are currently in a map. So that your birth chart is a map, and it's a map, I believe, of your potentials. And it is a map of how you can express yourself in the world. There are varieties of expression of that map. No two people's map is exactly the same. And we each choose to express this in a variety of ways depending on our level of psychological experience, our level of self awareness, our level of sensitivity. So it really is this map and it is this language, this alchemical language. And I think that's the easiest way to describe it.
yeah. So is it safe to say that it is science and spirituality
Well,
both?
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of mathematics involved in the calculation of a natal chart. So, on some level, and the movement of the planets, but it is more archetypal and certainly more, people expect a certain level of prediction to come out of astrology, but I use it more as a psychological roadmap and an archetypal experience rather than something predictive. So yes, it it does have a lot of stigmas attached to it.
Yeah, and I that's why I wanted you to go more into that to kind of clear the stigmas from the get-go here so we can
Sure.
really talk about the healing aspect of it. um, can you say more about the birth chart so people who had never had one they can understand what it is and how helpful it could be?
Well, that's great. A birth chart is a map that's from the moment that you're born. So I always say it's important to have your birth time when you get your astrological chart read. But everybody, I always say that everybody knows their sun sign because there's this sun sign guide in magazines and newspapers and uh, the internet for sure. And there's that very specific time period, 12 time periods throughout the year, where the sun is in Aries or Taurus or Gemini, etc. But then the sun sign is only one component of the astrological chart. So for a person who's never had their astrology read, they would sit with an astrologer and have a description of all of the planets and where all of the planets were when in that map when they were born. And the more accurate your birth time, like you give a birth time, a birthplace, a city, and a birth date. And the more accurate the information, the more accurate the astrologer can be with you in describing your map and your own psychology. I think a lot of things can be brought to light immediately when you read your astrological chart. A lot of psychological patterns, a lot of habits that can be brought to light immediately, where sort of cuts to the chase, where traditional therapeutic methods that don't have that information may take longer in the process. Whereas, I can look at an astrological chart and say, well, here you have, like, there are elements: water, earth, air, fire. All those elements can combine to create a certain dynamic in one's life. And if elements are missing, for example, you don't have planets in Earth, then you need some structure to make up for that lack of Earth, for example, which might be something very grounding, like cooking. Cook more. Maybe you should garden. Maybe you should do something earthy. So the astrological chart, I feel, cuts to the chase. It gets right into your own psyche. It gets right into your own, like, issues or not issues, talents, creativity, abilities, where opportunities are in your life, where you may be fortunate, where you could be feeling like you need to do some work in your life. And the other beautiful thing about astrology is, okay, so your chart is a map, but the planets continue to move. And when the planets move in the sky, they, in turn, speak to your astrological chart. And they trigger certain patterns in your astrological chart so that certain areas of your life come up for review at certain times in your life. For example, and every planet has its own cycle. As I said, the sun, everybody knows their sun sign. The sun takes one entire year to go around the entire zodiac. And then the moon takes 28 days. And Saturn takes 28, 29 years to go around the entire zodiac. So you benefit from looking at your astrological chart at different times in your life, because planets are doing different things, engaging with your chart in a way that you might not know until you start to look at your astrological chart at certain periods of time.
I want to come back to that, but before that, let me ask you a practical question. If someone were to have the wrong or not have access to the exact date of birth for whatever reason, right? The person might not be so sure. In what other ways then can you assure accuracy in creating the precise mapping?
And you're saying date of birth, not time of birth. I did have someone come many years ago, and she did not entirely know her date of birth because she was adopted and sort of found
That's right.
and it can become complicated without that. But I do ask them questions about their life and when certain things happened, and you know we're going to generally get a good sense of where things are. There are some components to the astrological chart that may not be available if a person doesn't have a date of birth.
Mm.
So if they know they're born between the 6th and 7th sometime, and maybe the 6th and maybe the 7th, there are certain things, such as the moon, that would change that could change during that time. So I would engage, a skilled astrologer is going to engage the client in a conversation that helps them understand where things could be important and where the aspects might be talking to one another. For example, the moon is a very good sort of planet to get in to establish where things might have happened, because it's our emotions and our feelings and our mother and etc. So there's, if someone doesn't know within 2 or 3 days when they're born, then the astrologer can glean information from their life story and get a sense of when the birth may have occurred.
So going back to the, that what I'm hearing is there are these, it's sort of like a continuum, a traveling between the Earth and the planets, right? And the understanding, it's both, it's an earthy understanding and it's a planetary one.
Well, yeah. When I was talking about Earth, I was talking about the element of Earth.
Right.
And yes, right. But there's our life on Earth, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's the archetypal expressions in
Mm-hmm.
our astrological chart. So we're all one. It's one big cosmos. It's us. It's not us and them, us and the planets. It's, they're part of our experience on Earth, as nature is part of our experience on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And the experience of the planets moving in their, what we call transit, in their cycle, their movement, that establishes new archetypal patterns coming forward. There's the collective unconscious, and certain planets speak to that in specific terms. They're, especially the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, they speak to the collective unconscious and the waves and the cycles that we see in society, in our life, in our world every day.
And going then to this, collective unconscious and the collective trauma that we share as part of the cosmos, right? And
Yes.
as we all have endured historical trauma, and we all are responding. I mean, trauma is a response, right, to events that had happened. So when you are working with people and you encounter trauma, either at the historical level or at the personal level, where do you lean the most then to navigate that?
Um,
To access the healing, the collective or the individual healing.
so I usually have a dialogue with the client. I can
Mm-hmm.
tell from the astrological chart how personal the collective experience became. So
Mm-hmm.
if someone grew up during, for example, the 1960s, for example, were very tumultuous. And so there are certain astrological dynamics that were present at that time. So maybe a person is born with those and they carry that energy, that revolutionary energy with them. Or maybe a person was a child and lived through that. And so there's a discussion of where those things lie in their astrological chart, meaning we have inner planets, we have outer planets, and the inner planets like the sun and the moon and Venus and Mercury and Mars, those are more of the personal experience. And then if when they get connected to the outer planets, through the astrological chart, then we see where there may have been trauma, and profound trauma, and or maybe not such profound trauma, or maybe there was something that they were going along living their life and something collective came in and changed everything. Maybe their country went to war or something. And so we talk about what was going on at certain time periods. And I think that the client feels happy to be heard and seen when you are describing the astrological chart and those planetary relationships to them. So they feel better knowing that they're not crazy, that something was going on during that time, and that their experience was maybe particular to them, depending on the alignment of their planets. Maybe something from the world collectively touched their chart and then brought changes to their world. And so we talk about how that energy needs to be handled through their life. What the benefit, what the opportunity. There's always a light and a dark. So the dark is where they've been traumatized. The light is how to use that energy creatively and bring that into a talent or an ability that and a strength in their life.
Mhm. So it's basically your work as an astrologer is an accompanying, you do a lot of accompanying, a lot of walking with the person. You're not so much telling them, even though you are accessing information that are not available to the person. But what I'm getting from what you're saying about the work with trauma, that you seem to be kind of giving the person tools for them to then do the transformation.
Yes, and I can help them through that transformation because I have these other tools that I use, Reiki and New Vision and all. But we they say, I'm glad that I'm not going crazy,
Mhm, mhm.
because I say, this is why it looks like this is why it feels like this is what happened. And yes, we do walk through it together. And I explain how they are going to emotionally feel at certain times because of those interactions with the planets and what those traumas were like. And so that's really helpful for them to understand, oh, okay, this is why. And all of that shows up in my chart. It really does. And it's like, yes, it does really show up in your chart. That's not a lie. That's a very serious implication of what was going on in your life at the time. So for sure, yes.
So there is a validation, right? Like
Absolutely.
there, oh my God, then I'm not crazy.
Yes.
Which is so important in trauma work, right? Because
Yes.
there is a lot of shaming, there is a lot of blaming, self-blaming, right? A lot of
Yes.
guilt in trauma. So for the people to then feel that, oh, I'm not crazy and I'm not causing this, right? Like you're giving them the root cause.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm, mhm,
And we're also giving them the understanding of, okay,
mhm.
well, this is how Pluto operates with your moon, and this is what it feels like, and this is how it manifests in your everyday life, and you can transcend the lower vibration of this and take it into a higher expression of it creatively. And here's how to do that. Here's what that looks like and what that feels like. I do encourage people to meditate all the time. Um, they don't always want to,
Uh-huh. Is
but
that it's well, it's hard, I as someone who works with individuals and trauma and through mindfulness, it is not easy. And sometimes that's the last thing that we ask them to do, because a lot has to be aligned, right?
right,
In order for someone to be able to sit still
yeah,
with the horror of the
yeah,
history.
yes, and sitting still is exactly one of the components of this, because
Mhm.
there's an element where the client needs to be held and contained just within the session,
Mhm.
and maybe their energy is erratic because of the trauma, because they weren't held, because it was something out of the ordinary for them. And you know, it's important for us to make a safe space and a safe container for the client. So yes, where they
Yeah.
can sit still and listen and be able to hear what I'm saying and then take it to the next level. Yes.
So how can people in, these days, the word vibration and working with one's own vibrations is everywhere, right?
Yes.
But how do we know? I know that you're saying, okay, maybe the meditation, but what is a way for a person to gauge vibration? How will they know when vibration hits them?
Um, I think what happens is they, I might say to them, okay, right now is a really good opportunity to heal, XYZ that happened in your life. And maybe going for a walk by the beach or the river or the lake is going to help. Going to and they feel themselves calm down and allow the process of healing to come forward and take over. So I'm looking at the chart. For example, anybody with a lot of water element, Pisces, Cancer, Scorpio, they're going to do well by, they can meditate, but they also are going to do well by being around water, by being by the beach, and people will say to me, "Oh, I need to have water. I do need to have that water." And it's the truth. And that just takes the energy down a notch or 10, and their vibration just feels much more safe and just calm, because they've accessed the water, and they're able to do that. Yeah.
Hence why it's so important, right? To
Yes.
know the elements
Know the
in
elements.
order to give that direction, right? So
Exactly.
then once the person knows, it's easier for them to know which elements are going to ground them. Because
Right.
we're talking about grounding the person, right?
Yes, yes, and just
That's
calming their emotions and pulling them out of survival mode and
mm,
anxiety states, and just helping them move into an understanding of their own energy.
mhm,
And you're this way because, you've got XYZ going on in your chart,
mhm,
and these techniques for that will help you. And um, so people are happy, you know, when they have those techniques, when they can walk by the water, or when they can do something like something with their hands, like cooking or knitting, or or ceramics, something that's going to be soothing to them. Or sometimes it's just reading. Sometimes just
mhm.
taking, they have a lot of air in their chart. They want to read, they want to learn more and they want to understand more. And for them, knowledge, those are the Gemini, Libra, Aquarius people, that for them, knowledge is the key to understanding themselves and working with that knowledge, and maybe journaling for them. It helps them.
So that's in the aspects of working with the elements, and then
Yes.
at the planetary levels, then can you give us an example of how you will work with, and staying with the trauma issues?
Right,
Like, can
right,
you
right.
give us some examples? You gave, I mean, these were very good ones that you just gave to help us understand.
Sure, sure. So, um, for example, me as an astrologer, if I'm going to sit with someone, I'm going to look at their chart before they come, and I'm going to see, okay, their moon, which is where everybody is sensitive or vulnerable, it's their relationship to the mother, it's our habits, our everyday habits. I'm going to look at the moon every day and see, look at their moon and see how they react emotionally to something. And maybe their moon is talking to an outer planet in their chart, and it's complicated, and that's where the trauma is. And so I'm going to be able to, where the moon is placed, how the moon is talking to something, say like Uranus, for example. Uranus is a very excitable energy, and maybe the person's moon is sort of clashing with that excitable energy too much. Maybe there was this energy when they were growing up at home. So that it's so I'm going to walk them through what that looked like, what that felt like. And I know that anybody with a lot of, say, for example, Uranus is going to be squirming in their seat and edgy and not contained easily. So I'm going to have to allow them the space to be who they are, but also simultaneously embrace them through my words, and help them understand what can be what can be valued in this, and what can be valued in that dynamic, and where the creativity is in that, and how they can get creative. Because Uranus is highly creative. It's innovative. It's like, how do you tap into the parts of you that are innovative? We're given this map for a reason. It's something where it's going to show us a lot about our lives and sort of navigating that. So perhaps this person has innovative ideas and they don't know where to go with them, and they're sort of bottled up inside, and so we can talk through where that is and what's going on. The other thing is that people do have a lot of, I get people who have psychic experiences, and that shows up in their chart, and they have like interdimensional dreams, and they also want to know that this is something useful for them, and it's not something that has to be held back, because they grow up in an environment where they're maybe a very religious environment, and that environment did not allow for this, and they don't know what to do with this energy. And so my experience with them is to help them, show them how to use it safely and not feel that it's wrong to use that. So
Ah, so this is so important, what you're saying about, when that energy shows up for people, sometimes is pathologized by the outside, and
right,
sometimes even by the same person.
sure,
So yet another example of validating experiences as opposed to pathologizing them, right? And
exactly,
stigmatizing that.
exactly, exactly.
And the use of the planetary influences as vehicles or tools of creativity. Can you say more about that?
Um,
That's so important, right?
right.
There is power in creativity, because that's where transformation can happen. That's where innovation can happen.
That's right. Well, when I use the word creativity, it's funny. I often get a response, well, I don't want to take an art class.
Right, right,
And I say, I can never draw, I can't paint. And I'm saying, no, that's not necessarily what, that's artistic. That's not
right.
necessarily, creative can be anything.
Anything. That's
And
exactly what I'm saying. Yes.
yeah, and so,
Yeah.
um, you know, taking an astrology class can be creative, Um, having an understanding of self can be creative, a better understanding of self. And so,
Revamping your business, your profession,
right,
right? That's a very
exactly.
creative act.
Revamping your home, doing your feng
Yeah.
shui, those are very creative things. So I often talk to people about those as well. And so that's exactly like when we start talking about the outer planets. When they come in, they bring us to a place of transformation, and they are asking for transformation, and we have to sort of respond to that call, because outer planets are very deep, long lasting experiences in a person's chart. And so when we start dealing with, say, for example, Neptune, And Neptune is an energy, like it's not very tangible. It's sort of the outer limits. And maybe someone's intuition is waking up. And I say to them, okay, this is great. This means that you can start trusting your instincts more. And that's a creative process. And go with that flow of understanding your intuition and allowing it to speak to you, because maybe you had the door shut on that, and now it's like the floodgates have opened and you're tapping into something, and it then leads them into something deeper, in a deeper relationship with themselves and with their own instincts about just their life.
Mhm. So people are, do you notice then that people are less afraid, for instance, of their own energy because they know how to channel it to the right, in the right direction or the right activity? Is
Yes,
that?
I
Mhm,
think it takes some practice. If they don't know their astrology and then I come in and say, "Well, here's Neptune and
mhm,
this is what's going on," then yes, it validates them, but it's probably like using a new muscle, like exercising a muscle in a way that they haven't done before. So it takes a little
mhm.
time, and with practice and the transit of the planet, especially an outer planet, may last more than a year. Could be 2 years, could be more, and they start to understand how to flex that muscle and how to allow things and how to allow the energy to come through them and not resist. Resistance is where everyone gets stuck. And
Well, yeah.
fear, yeah,
Mhm,
fear that
mhm.
perpetuates resistance is where everyone gets stuck. So
Yeah.
yes. And so
So,
not resisting that energy. Well, I feel I feel strangely like my dreams have been really deep and wild. Well, yes, that's what's part of this experience. And so allow for that. Talk with your dreams, talk with yourself and write it all down. Maybe this is going to help you understand, notice a pattern of what's happening in your sleep. Um, so yeah, not resisting the energy is really very big.
well, I'm thinking about, the going back to working with trauma and the responses. We have responses, right? We fight, we flight, or we freeze, right? When you are working with people, what are some, um, are there planets that are more, that you can say are more, or planetary influences that can be aligned to the fight flight response?
Sure, sure.
Can you break it down? Is it possible to break it
Yes,
down like that?
yes, because each planet has its own personality, and so, and and sometimes people benefit from reading about the mythology of the planet, and I tell them a mythological story. Um, so maybe they're going through, like a woman is going through some sort of sexual awakening, for example, and it's like this was taboo growing up, and this feels traumatizing. And so I'm talking about Pluto and the Persephone myth, for example. So I explain that and I explain what happened to Persephone, etc., and why this is coming up now. Why is this awakening now? And so we want to maybe work with like divine feminine principle, etc. And so, yeah, so Pluto is going to be more deep, deep, deep psychological, intense, passionate drives. And so that's going to be more like the closet has opened, and what's in the closet, what's in the basement, where because Pluto rules the underworld. So I describe the underworld and why it feels the way it does. Neptune is going to be like the ocean. It's going to be like you're in the water and you're engulfed. And how does that feel to be engulfed, and what is the dynamic of that, and how do you work with that energy? How do you don't resist the water, you flow with the water. um, Neptune is like the beach erosion. I always tell people, like, there's an eroding going on in their life where the water comes up on the beach and then erodes and then comes up on and so I explain that. Then there's Uranus, which is like lightning strikes, like all of a sudden you have this incredible realization or you have this incredible epiphany or this incredible idea. And Uranus is very like it can be, you know, shaking up the old. Uranus shakes things up, and it's shaking up the old pattern, so a new one can surface. And people don't want to. They don't want the new. They like comfort, and it's these are uncomfortable feelings. And so, one of the things with Uranus is that it's helping you align to something different and different in your life, and where you are different than other people and where your unique qualities, so tapping into your own unique qualities, those things are helpful with Uranus because one's uniqueness comes out then.
Yeah, there is such a rich way to help individuals because I mean all these elements are so distinct in particular, and so are human lives, right? We are complex, we are unique, and at the same time we have these common themes. And it seems like these what you call an alchemical language has so much to places from which to draw and give tools to people. I'm thinking what's happening now in the world and specifically in Ukraine. And I know we're not going to have time to go into the what an aura is and any of those things, but can countries have an aura? And what will you say is the aura of Ukraine by the power of greed right now, right?
Right. What I would think, countries have astrological charts. Every country, cities have astrological charts. I have not looked at the astrological chart of Ukraine. There are books that have, and there are astrologers who specialize in that. And looking at those patterns and that something was coming into the astrological chart of Ukraine that was going to evidently show something like this. So there's that, and those are bigger collective cycles for sure. Absolutely. And back 2 years ago, there were some intense astrological cycles happening, and this is where one astrologer that I've been friends with over the years says that these patterns are archetypally predictive, not concretely predictive. So when we see these patterns coming, we're like, oh, something's about to occur, and we're not entirely exactly sure how that's going to manifest exactly in everybody's life, but we know that the world is in for a collective experience. And so there are patterns that are evident, and they go through cycles, that they appear in history over and over again, that these particular cycles. And so, back in early 2020, some of these patterns came up, and we were due for something, but what was going to happen exactly, we knew was going to be global, but specifically, not entirely. But
So is that related to astrocartography?
um, it can be.
Or-
There, astrocartography is more. I think of that as more personal, because in
okay.
astrocartography, a person will come and say, I'm having a terrible time. I don't think I like living in New York, and I'll say, okay, that's because your Saturn line goes right through New York, and it's always work, and you're on it like the hamster treadmill, and you know what? Your chart looks better in London. Can your office, you know, send you to the London office? And they say, well, I'm going to see if I can do that. That's an easy example, as opposed to a person coming and saying, I don't know where I want to live. But yeah, but Like astrocartography, I would say I think an astrological chart of a country is more their own. It's like a personality. It's like their own map of that country and why it's going to be the way it is. And the United States right now is having a major aspect to its chart. So the United States, we take the chart of July 4th, 1776. And so we look at that astrological chart and the qualities of the US. It's a Cancerian country. And the planet Pluto at that moment was 27 degrees of Capricorn in the astrological chart of July 4th, 1776. And just a few weeks ago, Pluto arrived again for the first time since 1776. There, it's arrived again at 27 degrees of Capricorn because it takes Pluto 248, 250 years to go around the zodiac. So now the United States is having what we call a Pluto return. People don't have those, countries have those because people don't generally live 250 years. Um, so they, so the country itself, the United States, experiences perhaps a shift of, Pluto's about power and empowerment and disempowerment, power on the world stage. The United States will experience this Pluto return, and now they're faced with like, what do we do to help Ukraine, etc. in this moment. So it's about exerting their power, or how much power do they want to use in this situation, etc. So,
And you said that United States is a Cancerian country. Can you say more
yes,
about?
because it was born on July 4th. So July 4th is within the sign
Oh,
of
right.
Cancer. Right. So it's a Cancerian country. So what do people call it home? And the interesting thing is you think of the United States as this melting pot where people came and started their families, and there's that. There's a lot of Cancerian energy where people, put down roots and created a new home for themselves. So yeah. And welcoming refugees and stuff like that. Yeah. Um,
So I know that you describe self-discovery as a lifelong journey, and that makes sense then why you have chosen astrology, because you have some aspects that are immediate, right? There is an immediacy to them, and then
mhm,
there like the cycles of the moon, and
right.
then these other 100 years
Yes.
of circling, right? That
Yes.
can also then help people see where they are evolving to.
Yes,
That
exactly.
is so awesome.
Yes, it is. It really is amazing. And there are certain things, like for example, Saturn, every 29 years returns to where it was when you were born. So when you're a 29-year-old, you're having this initiation to go to be 30 years old, and you have what's called a Saturn return. And this is a very
Mm.
common and popular aspect in astrology. And people are like, I'm having my Saturn return. Like, what do I do? And you ever notice like people who are 28, 29 years old and then they turn 30 and they're very different. They're mature. They've arrived on some level. So you think of someone who's like going through that and they're like, having their life, they're feeling things out, they're starting their career, maybe their family or whatever in their late 20s, and then suddenly there's this seriousness and sometimes people say, I'm going to be 30 and I haven't done this, this, and this. And they're counting off the list of things like, why don't I have a partner yet? Why am I not married? Why don't I own my own business yet? Or something. And that Saturn return brings these things to them and they say, okay, well, these are goals that I want. Saturn is about accomplishing something and having it in your hand. So by the time they turn 30, they start to feel differently and they feel much more like an adult and they've arrived on a certain level. Hmm.
Thank you so much, Deb, for all this refreshing and insightful information that you are sharing with us. Is there anything that I have not asked that you would like to close with?
Um, I think that it's helpful for people to get their astrological chart read. I think it's
Mhm.
and I think it's important for them to do a little research on the astrologer that they are interested in, and they should look at their background and see where they're coming from and if it speaks to them. There's lots of astrologers, and I really believe that it can be very, very helpful and entertaining and interesting to get your astrological chart read, and you always learn more about yourself. It's educational. So I think that's important, and I think it's important to seek out an astrologer that is empathic and that speaks empathically and that is on the same page with you, as opposed to someone who's going to, and there are astrologers who, might be more inclined to make big grand predictions, and I think it's better to connect with where you are now, what you've been through, and how to go forward creatively.
Thank you so much. And thank you, listeners. We can, or you can access today's interview at YouTube or Anchor. And if you are interested, hit the subscribe button in your podcast and just let us know, give us a review and tell us what was important about today's conversation. I am with you in love and compassion, always, always.